Now let's move forward. Rob, I'm really excited to hear about your type ride event. Now, we talked about on the onset of the show how for 4 weeks you've been drinking from the fire hose. You've been over at the Planet Killer Base, as we like to call the Death Star area.
The Death Star, yeah.
The Death Star, where we train.
Schoolhouse.
The schoolhouse, yeah. So you went through those experiences, and you actually gave us a little bit on the pre-show about some of the experiences that you had for your type ride. Now, we know that you were paired up with another first officer for this training event. So first officer. So in the simulator and in the training, the trainer, you would have to spend half your time in the right seat doing all the duties that you were being trained to do. And the other time you were in the left seat, going through the motions of what the captain would be doing or the pilot monitoring would be doing from the left seat. So actually, I believe that there's good in that
there is.
You have to switch your motor skills, and you're not just doing muscle memory, and you're actually physically and mentally really thinking about what you're supposed to be doing. I think that is a better learning experience. Some people say that's negative learning because I'm not in the left seat. Why should I be sitting in the left seat? I should be in the right seat for everything. And there can be points made to that as well. But I honestly think that that's a little bit more difficult to switch seats like that.
Yeah.
When it came time to getting your, since we have AQP, your maneuvers validation, your LOE, and your RAD, that 2 to 3 day event is really what consists of what we would call a check ride.
Yeah.
How did your experience go in that process?
Overall, it was great. The instructors, the checked airmen, and the sim instructors and the ground school instructors at our schoolhouse are the best in the industry. They're really good, and I really mean that. They do a really good job. They have a lot of information that they have to teach over a 4-week period, and they do it in a really good, building block style of learning. So basics, and then you build upon what you learned yesterday, and you continue on. But like you said, there's a lot of information, and the student has to put forth their time with studying and doing a lot of rote memory and chair flying and stuff like that. So as long as you do your part, and they do their part, which they did, it all comes together at the end. So the last 3 days, like you spoke, were the AQP versions of a check ride. So it started off with maneuvers validation, which basically sum it up in a nutshell. You go out and perform the maneuvers that are required, like single engine takeoff and landings, wind shear, ground proximity warning stuff, TCAS resolution alerts. So you go through all these scenarios that you have to demonstrate proficiency in. And so that lasts about 2 hours each person. So me and my sim partner were paired up for that, and we're both FOs. So he had like you said, he was captain for me, and then we switched seats 2 hours later, and then I was captain for him. So powered through that. That was pretty straightforward. Great event. Really solidifies how much you've absorbed over the last 4 weeks in just demonstrating that you can do the maneuvers without any coaching or anything. So that was nice. Next day is the LOE, which is line oriented evaluation. Right. So basically it's training, but it's checking. So they simulate a flight from point A to point B, and they want to, see how you handle all the scenarios with headings, intercepting radials, holdings, malfunctions, and stuff like that in a flight from point A to point B. So treat it like a real flight, like there's real people behind you, and go up and do it. So again, that was straightforward, piece of cake. There's a couple of hiccups along the way that there's a lot of things that they introduce to you even at that point that you haven't seen in your whole training, because it doesn't really pertain to the training. It's just something that you just need to see when it happens, and you go out there and do it, like the box stuff, uplinks and stuff like that. So anyway, that day was pretty straightforward. And then the last day, which is what they call the loft, line-oriented flight training, which is, again, simulating a flight from point A to point B, and then turning around, doing a turn, and going back to, another airport, which is like a typical day on the flight line for us, except this time they're really hands-off, and you just go out and do it. So since my sim partner wasn't a captain, I had to have a seat fill, which is training term for somebody who is a captain who wasn't training with me, who's sitting in and filling the captain's role in my loft. So this particular pilot is a check airman. So he's another instructor at the schoolhouse, and he was hired to sit and be my captain for my my loft, my basically check ride, like we've been saying.
Yeah.
And so there was a little conversation that my training, my seat fill check airman and the actual check airman that was running the show, who was actually checking the event, had when we went through our performance review. Performance meaning the airplane's weight, takeoff weight, pertaining to the runway and single engine climb and climb limited and all that stuff. So we had a runway change, and we also had a weight change, and we were 2,000 pounds heavier than what we planned, which for our plans, our planning purposes, we have to redo our performance and get new performance numbers. So as I reviewed it, I discovered that we were heavier. So I went down into the MCDU in the airplane, and was getting ready to extract the information out of the box with a new TPS. And the guy running the show, the check airman running the show, he's like, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you doing?" I was like, "Well, I'm requesting a new TPS from the box." And he's like, "Well, all you have to do is just uplink the speeds." And I was like, "But we're heavier than our plan. I mean, we're heavier than our assumed takeoff weight. We need to get a new TPS, and that's method 1 in our blue pages." And he goes, "No, just uplink the runway change, put the new runway in there, and then request then uplink the new speeds for the new runway." And I'm like, but those numbers don't apply to us anymore, because those uplink speeds were when I originally uplinked, the flight plan to the airplane. And that was when the dispatcher did his flight planning. So now that we're heavier than what the flight plan was planned at, we need to have new numbers. We need new TPS numbers. And he goes, no, you just uplink the new runway speeds. And I looked at my seat filled check airman, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me. I said, I mean, if that's what you're telling me to do, I'm going to cooperate and graduate and just do what you tell me to do. But yeah. I was like, I don't want to learn. I don't want to have a negative, transfer of learning here. I want to make sure that I'm doing it right, because, this whole time reading the book and doing it on the 7.3, this is what you do. Right. You get new numbers. And so the check airman kind of looked over his shoulder, and he's like, "Yeah, he's right. We need to get new TPS numbers, because we are heavier than 2,000 pounds, which brings us above our assume." And so these guys just started going back and forth on the performance stuff and how to do it, where to get the numbers. And I just kind of sat back and just kind of listened in my left ear, waiting for them to come up with a resolution to how we're supposed to do this. And crazy enough, the speeds really only change by, 1 or 2 knots anyway. It's right. Yeah. Measuring it with a laser, marking it with a grease pencil, cutting it with an axe. Yeah. But to fulfill, the performance review part, 91, 61, whatever it is, 121, certification, you have to know your performance for that runway. Sure. And so since we didn't have it, because we were outside of that weight window, we needed to get a new one. And finally, after about 15, 20 minutes of this conversation, he's like, well, just go ahead and just use the uplink speeds because we don't have time to go through all that other stuff. I'm like, and he's like, we'll talk about it again in the debrief. I'm like, all right, sounds good. Hi, he's back. Anyway, that was the beginning of the check ride, or the beginning of that one event. So he was kind of the guy running the show was kind of, I wouldn't say his cage was rattled, but he was thrown off his rhythm, so to speak. And then I didn't mention this in the pre-show, but also I guess this was a fairly new event for this guy. Mm-hmm. So I guess he hadn't been doing this, this scenario very much. So he was, trying to read it by a script, and he may have, went past something or missed it. But anyway, so as we took off, everything was fine. Started climbing. I think it was out of Boston, and he needed us to level off at like 5,000 feet, and we had already climbed through 5,000 feet. And so he's like, maintain 5,000. So we were like, okay, leveling at 6,000, descending back down to 5,000. So we leveled back, descended back down to 5,000 feet, and everything is like, okay, now you're clear to flight level 230. All right, fine. Open climb, flight level 230. Here we go. Not open climb, managed climb to flight level 230. So we started climbing out 250 knots from 5,000. And as you go through 10,000 feet, normally with the planes, the way it's programmed, it'll start accelerating to its climb speed, which is faster than 250 knots. Usually goes to what, 290 or whatever, 300 something,
300, 320, something, whatever.
Yeah, whatever it's programmed to do for the best climb speed. So we get through 10,000, and I'm looking, and I'm like, this thing is not accelerating. It's still at 250 knots. And I looked at the FCU. I'm like, well, I looked at my FMA. I'm like, we're not in selected speeds, and we're in managed climb and managed speeds. This thing should be accelerating right now. So I looked over at my seat fill cap, and I'm like, is there something that I'm missing here? Everything's managed. Why is this airplane not accelerating past 250 knots? So he looks down at the box, he looks at the FMA, looks at the FCU, and he's like, I don't know why. It's not, he's like, I can't figure it out myself. And he starts hitting, goes to the prog, I think it's the prog page in the box, which tells you what mode you're in. Mm-hmm. And he goes, for some reason, it's in the descent mode. And I'm like, well, Jesus, we should be climbing at least, So everybody's head kind of got a little wrapped around that for a little while. And they were like, he's like, oh, and I said, we actually climbed through 5,000 feet, leveled off at 6, and then descended back down to 5,000 because of the clearance. Would that have put the box back in a descent mode? And he goes, that's exactly what it was. Good catch. So he recruises the box at whatever altitude we were at, and then we just kept climbing, and put the plane went back into a climb mode, which then accelerated to whatever 310 knots. Yeah. And so I'm like, geez, man, this check ride's going great right now. I'm like, man, we're gonna have a lot to talk about when we get to the debrief.
But you're catching everything, so I mean,
yeah, and that's exactly what he said. He's like, that's and that's how it is for pretty much every checking event, whether it's Roger, Tony, whatever airplane you fly. We use the acronym, and we use it on the 175 at Sandpiper, CAMI. Confirm, activate, monitor, and intervene if you have to. So, confirm what you're doing. Check with your co-pilot, make sure this is what you want, or this is what the clearance was. Activate it, and then monitor, the aircraft systems and navigation, and make sure it's doing what you wanted it to do. Yeah. And if it doesn't, you have to intervene and do something different to get it to do what you want. So that's what we basically had to do the whole time.
What's it doing?
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, as Tony, and Roger, when you're in the training world, you don't spend much time above 5,000 feet, in the simulator. So everything's approaches, returning back, missed approach, holding. So you never really, flex the airplane's capabilities above 10,000 feet and really, really see how the VNAV is going to work vertically accelerating and you understand in theory, and on the 7.3 and the 175, all the VNAV stuff are cool, and I've seen it. I know how it works, and I totally understand it. And with that knowledge, you know how the Airbus is supposed to work now too, because you just went through 4 weeks of training, but you just haven't really seen it happen.
Yeah.
So, and then you're getting all these distractors with headings and holds and airspeeds and all that stuff, and next thing you know, you get an ECAM malfunction, and you have to deal with that, and you can get pretty busy up there. Especially with a new guy like me, you can get what we call into the yellow pretty quick. As long as you I've learned to do the Airbus kind of pace. If something happens, bing, sit back, take a puff from your cigarette. All right, we got a generator 2 fault. Take another puff from your cigarette. All right. Yeah, that's not an immediate action or quick action or a ECAM exception. All right. Who's going to fly this one? All right. Well, you're doing good. Why don't you keep flying? All right. Yeah, you do that. All right. Who's going to talk on the radios? All right, you do that too. All right.
Hey,
Take another.
Rob, you smoke pot?
Yeah, right. We just
That's exactly what I was thinking.
It's French, so you're always smoking a cigarette.
I can't condone smoking because that's not allowed on the flight deck.
Well, why do we have ashtrays? No, just kidding.
Well, it used to be. I've heard stories. I've seen some things. I've seen a thing or two. Dun, 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 dun. No.
Yeah. So anyway, that was that, and we landed. Turned the airplane around, had another malfunction, diverted, landed, and as I landed, pulled off to the unnamed taxiway in Richmond because there was no sign saying, this taxiway Yankee or Bravo. Cleared the runway. I was like, hey, tower, is Mayday American 7, 320 or whatever. Just exited off of an unnamed taxiway. We're going to stop here and run a checklist. He's like, all right, roger that. Just as soon as that happened, the printer message came off the printer. Congrats, welcome to the Airbus.
I was like,
yay!
Nice.
So yeah, that was that. So it was fun, exciting. I'm happy to get that behind me. Sorry for the long-winded story, but I was a little excited to share with you.
Congratulations to Rob, the newest of the Airbus pilots.
Hoorah!
So congratulations. I can't wait to cross paths with you out on the flight line. I'm in Dallas now quite a bit, flying out of Ontario, so there's no reason why that can't happen. You got IOE coming up now.
I do.
Initial operating experience. So you're a full-fledged Airbus pilot. You have your FAA certificate. At least you're temporary, and as we discussed, 2 or 3 shows ago, your temporary is good for 120 days, and if you don't get it by 90 days, make sure you make some phone calls or go online and check the status. However, you've got this. You go out, tomorrow?
I did head out Friday, tomorrow, the 23rd. My trip actually starts on Saturday, the 24th, with a 2-leg trip from Charlotte to Dallas to Salt Lake City. So that's going to be perfect because, they're long legs, and you really get to ease into the operation. Obviously, it's going to be my first time flying the real airplane outside of the simulator. So just don't tell all those passengers that, because I'm sure they'll freak out. But so that'll be the first trip, and it's a 4-day trip. I only need 15 hours. But the trip is scheduled for like 21 or 22 hours. So I'll have plenty of time to at least get the 15 hours. And that's the minimum. So obviously if I don't meet or exceed the check airman's expectations or my expectations, then we could always add on more. But typically 15 hours is all it's going to take.
Nice.
Yeah. Fired up. Ready to do it. Ready to really put it to use.
So at the airlines, we do this initial operating experience, but in a Part 91 world, this doesn't exist. You get your type rating, and the very next day, you could go up.
Let's go.
Let's go by
Wow.
yourself. Yeah.
Yep.
Just do it.
And
Just
Roger,
do it.
last time you were on the show, we were talking about you had just completed a type rating in the Falcon EZ, right?
The Falcon 900 Easy, correct.
The 900 EZ. Now, have you had a chance to fly that particular aircraft as a PIC since your type rating?
No, the plane's actually not even around right now. It's in its C check right now. And so it won't be getting out for probably another month or so.
Yeah.
So I haven't even seen the airplane,
now
which we knew going into it.
Yeah. Now you have flown since our last show. You had the wedding, you had that event that you went up and you got to do some rafting, and which is super cool. One of these days, I'm gonna take you up with me. We're gonna go do
put
some.
Your life in my hands again.
Abso-freaking-lutely. And I look forward to that. But what kind of flying have you been doing in the interim?
For the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, I haven't done a whole lot of flying. I had that personal stuff in between. It's actually been more personally busy in this little bit of flying break that I've had. Most of the stuff that I've done has been, I think it's actually all been inter-California. I've gone up and back to Truckee a few times. I went to Napa just 2 days ago. Nice. A day trip to Napa. So hung out up there for a day. And other than that, I'm sure I've done something else, but now you're getting back a couple weeks. It's been Truckee, multiple flights to Truckee and back.
So you leave Gillespie early in the morning, fly up to Truckee, and then your clients, obviously they have a car or what have you, pick them up. They're off on their own. Walk us through what you do once you park the aircraft, run your shutdown checklist. The customer leaves. What's involved from that point forward?
Well, the interesting part of that question is you've kind of completely skipped all of the work that I do. Because all of the work that we do actually is figuring out what you're going to do once you park the airplane and put the parking brake on. So we'll kind of back that up a little bit, because unlike, at the airlines, you have these personnel and departments that are going to do this stuff actually for you. Mm-hmm. And so in this case, the Truckee trip was actually a little bit interesting because I did some initial work. We were going to be there for 2 nights. Actually, it's just going to be me. The other pilot was going to airline home because I had one pilot flying up with me, and then another pilot was going to be going back. And so first thing is we got to figure out where we're going to stay. And then second step is how are we going to get to where we're going to stay? And so the first thing I did was look at hotels. And in this case, the hotels were extremely expensive. In my case, I have family that's down in Sacramento, which is an hour and a half, 140 drive or so. And so I was like, well, I can maybe go down to Sacramento. The hotels are only they were 25% of what they were going to be charging up in Truckee. Mm-hmm. Except then the problem was, how are we going to get there? And this process started 5 days prior to the trip, because when you're going into towns like this, especially Truckee in the last decade or so, the Bay Area has inundated the area, and it's a big tourist. And so there's not that's why the hotels are expensive. And then there were no cars. So I called up a car rental place and they didn't have anything. And then fortunately they actually called me back about 8 hours later, and I grabbed a car. And so what we did at that point, we parked the airplane and we got the car, and then we drove an hour and a half down to Sacramento, and I dropped the other pilot off at the airport. And then I kind of started my layover, if you will, for a couple nights before then picking up the other pilot 2 days later and then driving all the way back up to Truckee to do that outbound flight. So it's kind of a little bit different, because the flying the airplane for us is obviously our primary job, but we have other primary jobs as well, because we're responsible for all the logistics. And then obviously once you start doing the international stuff, that only, increases by a factor of 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we take that for granted, I think, for those that, went from either the military to the airlines, or from, flying flight instruction to a regional and then to a major, we never really see that portion, all the logistics, like you said, that are involved. And, that's always something that's been so interesting to me. And I've always said this every time we get together, man, you work way too hard.
When it's kind of, even while we've been sitting here for, a couple hours now, I've gotten multiple text messages and emails that I need to get back to that are coming in, most of it all international related, because those responsibilities without, the 121, I mean, whole departments that are responsible for doing that, it's just us. And so I've got some work to do as soon as we get off of that, kind of for that kind of stuff as well. And it's just like the logistics, especially depending on where you're going, can get somewhat complex.
So let me ask you a question. When you're thinking about these things, cars, hotels, things like that, and I guess you'd also have to cater the airplane for the
and we're responsible for the catering. If that's
so you have to think about where you're going to get all that. What kind of parameters do you guys do you set, or do you have anything set for hotels, rental cars? I mean, if you show up and they don't have any, economy cars, are you guys regulated to like a compact, or stuff like that? A hotel, can it be a 5-star hotel, or does it have to be a
moving target? We have general guidelines that we are supposed to stick within, and like my personal policy, which I think has kind of allowed me some freedom, but it's basically, I try and stay within that framework. And if I can't, I'm going to go and I'm going to get permission, or I'm going to say, hey, look, this is what's going on. And then I'll get permission, because there are times, obviously, if these people are
now the permission, does it come from the owner?
I follow the chain of command, for lack of better terms.
Okay, yeah.
I go to our quote unquote chief pilot, director of operations, whatever you want to call him. Yeah. And then he can go and he can give me the yay or nay, and he can go talk to the owners. I do not go to the owners. I understand. I don't need to get into the office politics, if you will. But I'll get the okay from our director of operations, because he's the one that in the end kind of pays all the bills and passes that on to the owners. And for the most, I've never had a problem with it, because I think for the most part that the owners realize that when they're operating, with multi-million-dollar budgets for this airplane, even if I end up having to get a hotel at $500 a night, in the end, that's not going to get noticed, a few times a year.
Yeah.
But I always respect the fact and remember that I am employed by these people, and I'm spending their money. And if I'm going to spend their money, I want to actually, be
respectful of
the fact that even though I charge, tens of thousands of dollars, that's not my money, and be responsible and respectful of that.
So that brings up another question for me. When you refuel the airplane, what's the biggest price tag you've seen on a fill up? And because I don't know, Tony, I don't know if
what's the going rate?
I haven't put any gas in an airplane since 2005, so I don't know.
That's another thing, that from a logistics standpoint, how to get around some of that. We have. We're actually a member of something called CAA's, Corporate Aircraft Association. And when we're planning out, there are specific airports and FBOs at specific airports that have a much better fuel rate. And so we always try to hit those up at the places where where they are not a member of CAA. Then we are going to try and get some contract fuel. In some places there is not contract fuel, and we try and tanker fuel, and all of that is done, prior. Unfortunately, Napa being an example, I tankered fuel because fuel up there was over $6.50 a gallon.
So you decide to tanker it yourself? Those are part of the logistic things that you have to decide.
I make the decision to tanker it on my own, typically.
There's a lot of decisions going on.
There's a lot of decisions that are going on, especially when you first start. As you kind of go, you'll learn where you got to watch out for.
Sure.
But that is something that you're going to need to look up and kind of verify before you go, because the last thing I want to do is end up having to answer a question. Okay, well, you can go to places where fuel is $7 plus a gallon. And when you're talking about putting, anywhere between 300 and 1,300 gallons of fuel, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Typically we're spending about $4 a gallon now. Fuel's gone up. I don't know if you guys are even aware of it.
No, we don't.
Gone back up. When I first started a year ago, we were probably paying on an average. We were probably paying close to maybe $3.25 a gallon. It's probably gone up to $3.75 to $4 a gallon now on an average across the entire, operation. But you go to some places, big international airports. If I were to fly into DFW, you really got to be careful of those. Lindbergh, they'll charge you $8 a gallon.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now you're talking a difference of $4 a gallon, and I'm gonna be the one that's gonna have to explain that.
Yeah, double the cost. Yeah,
$7 a gallon is probably the biggest one that I've had to do. But again, you've tried to mitigate that, and okay, maybe I only got to put 300 gallons on and get a $2,100 fuel bill, but that 300 gallons isn't going to go more than an hour's flight either.
$2,100 just out the tailpipe.
There it goes. Pretty quick.
Wow.
And all of a sudden that $500 a night hotel room doesn't seem quite so bad.
It's not so bad.
But again, it's that fiduciary responsibility that I try and go no matter who I'm flying for at any job. But there's definitely a lot of things that are going on before the flight leaves. But in our operation, it's a little weird. In our operation, most of my work is done. By the time I show up at the airplane and start the APU, most of my job is done. Then it's the easy part, and then it's just flying the airplane. You guys, that's all you guys are.
We only do the
doing.
fun stuff and complain about everything.
Right.
Yeah. Everything else is already there.
So there is definitely a big difference there, but a lot of it is pre-trip planning on multiple fronts.